Alright, Screwtape Letter 9. My dear Wormwood, I hope my last letter has convinced you that the trough of dullness or dryness through which your patient is going at present will not of itself give you his soul, but needs to be properly exploited. What forms the exploitation should take I will now consider. In the first place, I have always found that the trough periods of the human undulation provide excellent opportunities for all sensual temptations, particularly those of sex. This may surprise you because, of course, there is more physical energy and therefore more potential appetite at the peak periods. But you must remember that the powers of resistance are then also at their highest. The health and spirits which you want to use in producing lust can also, alas, be very easily used for work or play or thought of or innocuous merriment. The attack has a much better chance of success when the man's whole inner world is drab and cold and empty. And it is also to be noted that the trough sexuality is subtly different in quality from that of the peak, much less likely to lead to the milk and water phenomenon which the humans call being in love, much more easily drawn into perversions, much less contaminated by those generous and imaginative and even spiritual concomitants which often render human sexuality so disappointing. It is the same with other desires of the flesh. You are much more likely to make your man a sound drunkard by pressing drink on him as an anodyne when he is dull and weary than by encouraging him to use it as a means of merriment among his friends when he is happy and expansive. Never forget that when we are dealing with any pleasure in its healthy and normal and satisfying form, we are, in a sense, on the enemy's ground. I know we have won many a soul through pleasure. All the same, it is his invention, not ours. He made the pleasures. All our research so far has not enabled us to produce one. All we can do is to encourage the humans to take the pleasures which our enemy has produced, at times or in ways or in degrees which he has forbidden. Hence we always try to work away from the natural condition of any pleasure to that in which it is least natural, least redolent of its maker, and least pleasurable. An ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure is the formula. It is more certain, and it's better style. To get the man's soul and give him nothing in return, that is what really gladdens our Father's heart, and the troughs are the time for beginning the process. But there is an even better way of exploiting the trough. I mean, through the patient's own thoughts about it. As always, the first step is to keep knowledge out of his mind. Do not let him suspect the law of undulation. Let him assume that the first ardors of his conversion might have been expected to last, and ought to have lasted forever, and that his present dryness is an equally permanent condition. Having once got this misconception well fixed in his head, you may then proceed in various ways. It all depends on whether your man is the desponding type who can be tempted to despair, or of the wishful thinking type who can be assured that all is well. The former type is getting rare among the humans. If your patient should happen to belong to it, everything is easy. You have only got to keep him out of the way of experienced Christians, an easy task nowadays, to direct his attention to the appropriate passages in Scripture, and then to set him to work on the desperate design of recovering his old feelings by sheer willpower, and the game is ours. If he is of the more hopeful type, your job is to make him acquiesce in the present low temperature of his spirit, and gradually become content with it, persuading himself that it is not so low after all. In a week or two, you will be making him doubt whether the first days of his Christianity were not perhaps a little excessive. Talk to him about moderation in all things. If you can once get him to the point of thinking that religion is all very well up to a point, you can feel quite happy about his soul. A moderated religion is as good for us as no religion at all, and more amusing. Another possibility is that of a direct attack on his faith. When you have caused him to assume that the trough is permanent, can you not persuade him that his religious phase is just going to die away like all his previous phases? Of course, there is no conceivable way of getting by reason from the proposition, I am losing interest in this, to the proposition, this is false. But as I said before, it is jargon, not reason, you must rely on. The mere word phase will very likely do the trick. I assume that the creature has been through several of them before. They all have. And that he always feels superior and patronizing to the ones he has emerged from, not because he has really criticized them, but simply because they are in the past. You keep him well fed on hazy ideas of progress and development and the historical point of view, I trust, and give him lots of modern biographies to read? The people in them are always emerging from phases, aren't they? You see the idea? Keep his mind off the plain antithesis between true and false. Nice, shadowy expressions. It was a phase. I've been through all that. And don't forget the blessed word, adolescent. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. And that is letter 9.
Hello.
Hey, Michael.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing great.
There. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has. How have you been?
I'm good. Yeah, I saw the book. The book you have coming out. How is it different than the first book?
Well, we cleaned up the text a little, but the main difference is that it's now in glorious color. So all the graphics look a lot better. It just feels like a new book.
Yeah, as you can tell, I've gotten this wet with alcohol. I've got it dog-eared and marked and underlined that I do with my men's group every time we meet. Almost every time.
Yeah, I love to see a well-used book.
So yeah, I thank you, and I'm going to buy it when it comes out. I'm going to pre-order it today.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. So you didn't add any drinks into it or anything? Just
No, it's the classic drinking with the saints, just visually improved.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, we are here with Michael Foley. He is the author of Drinking with the Saints. I've got the book. He's got a new book coming out that we're going to talk about. And for everybody that's interested, this is an amazing book. I use it in my men's group. Often I'll read from it. We'll do the blessings that are in it. And like he talks about, we don't get inebriated. We don't get drunk, but we do have merriments with alcohol, which I love. I love this book. And he is doing letter 9 of the Screwtape Letters. So welcome, Michael.
Hey, it's great to be on. Thanks for having me, Jay.
Yeah, this is exciting. It's nice to have you on video for my YouTube show too.
Absolutely.
You got the beard I want when I retire.
Oh, very good.
I'm a little jealous. So I have to ask, what did you think when I asked you to do this? Are you familiar with the Screwtape Letters, or is this something you've read before?
It's been a few years since I've read them. And when I did, I just found them incredibly insightful. This is an amazing work.
Yeah. So I guess what was your take on it? Just your commentary on how can we apply it to our lives during Lent and beyond?
Well, I thought it was really good about the way it talked about spiritual dryness, and he's talking about someone who's recently gone through a conversion and they're all euphoric about conversion, and then that euphoria wears off and then you're kind of dry. This theme of spiritual dryness is a very old one. St. Ignatius of Loyola does a very good job talking about spiritual dryness. We Catholics, I think, have a very good understanding of the psychology of man, and we realize that not every day is, Easter or Pentecost. We're on this high, that we're going to go through low periods. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually an opportunity for spiritual maturity. And, some of the great saints had periods of incredible spiritual dryness. Most recently, Mother Teresa is an excellent example of this. We discovered after her death that she had terrible periods, actually almost uninterrupted periods of spiritual dryness. And her detractors, and it's hard to believe, but there actually were detractors against Mother Teresa, said, aha, this shows that, Christianity is not this, little fairy tale. And we Catholics were like, yeah, no one said it was. No one said that you'd have a little Disney movie ending once you converted. That's not what the faith is all about. So spiritual dryness is a part of spiritual growth, and the key is learning how to respond to it intelligently.
Yeah, and you talked in our podcast we did a while ago about a lady, I think, that came to the story about that lady that basically said, I can't stop drinking. And it really hit me hard. Really resonate with that, because I mean, we all struggle with spiritual dryness at times. Those troughs, like it talks about in letter 9. Anyway.
Yeah, and any pleasure can kind of creep up on you. Again, I really liked C.S. Lewis reminding us God made all the pleasures. Yeah. The demons cannot make a single pleasure. All they can do is pervert the pleasures that God has given us. So the main theme of chapter 9 is sex as a pleasure, but food, drink also are pleasures, and they are good. They are good in and of themselves, but the problem is we can slowly become either addicted to them or use them as a substitute for the main pleasure we should have, which is in God. So this is what the demons are trying to do. They're trying to take a good thing and pervert it towards their own use. There's so many ways to take a good that God has given us and then to privilege it more than God himself. So there's nothing wrong with drinking. There's nothing wrong with exercising. There's nothing wrong with making money. But all these things can be perverted. There are a couple great lines in chapter 9, and one of them is, an ever increasing craving for an ever diminishing pleasure is the formula. And that's such a great rule of thumb. If you find yourself constantly trying to increase the high of a physical pleasure, then you're in kind of a dangerous area. And boy, is that true of alcohol. That you're having a good time, you're making merry with your friends. The one drink tastes really good, the second drink tastes good, and you want to continue the merriment. So you're like, well, let's do the third drink, let's do the fourth. And before you know it, you've crossed the line from innocent merriment to getting buzzed or worse.
Yeah.
And in a sense, you weren't necessarily trying to get drunk, but you were just trying to chase the high, and that's where it gets tricky.
Yeah, he talks about that. He says, you're much more likely to make your man a sound drunkard by pressing drink on him as an anodyne when he is dull and weary than by encouraging him to use it as a means of merriment. Wow.
Yeah, and that's the other great line of that book, or that chapter. So in some respects, he is talking about two different things. So I was talking just a moment ago about chasing the high when you're high, which is dangerous. But then the other danger is not drinking when you're high, so to speak, but drinking when you're low. And that line, pressing drink on him as an anodyne when he is dull and weary.
Yeah.
In some respects, one way to think about that is, I think he's describing the temptation to drink to forget rather than the temptation to drink to remember. Healthy drinking is drinking to remember. Unhealthy drinking is drinking to forget. And when you're dull and weary, you just want to forget the dullness and the weariness. And you turn to the bottle as a means of, sort of dulling the hurt or dulling the fatigue. And again, that's an understandable temptation, but that is, I think, and I'm no, doctor or psychologist, but I think that kind of person will be more prone to alcoholism.
Yeah.
It's the guy who's drinking when he's low. I think that's a more dangerous place to be than the guy who's drinking when he's high. The guy who's drinking when he's high can also become an alcoholic. I'm not denying that. But I think the melancholic drinker my guess is that he's the one more prone to alcoholism. But again, C.S. Lewis has a good insight. Somewhere in this chapter, he says, when a man is high, he can even sexual temptation, when he's in a peak period, he can convert that to other forms of healthy activity. And and I don't know if he would consider anger a peak period, but you are taking advantage of an energy and channeling it in a good direction. So that would be better than, just taking a few shots because you're so angry.
Yeah. Hey, I was going to ask you, what did you give up for Lent, if you don't mind sharing?
I gave up drinking.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh no. Yeah.
God bless our liturgical year. It provides opportunities for you to reboot and recalibrate.
Yeah.
And I'll be perfectly honest with you. My wife and I began drinking a lot more during all the COVID shutdowns.
Yeah.
The ones that happened in 2020, and that builds up an extra habit. Your tolerance goes up and everything else. And so I decided this Lent, it's time to really reboot the system.
Yeah.
Because there's a physical reboot and an emotional reboot. And I've actually been surprised that, knock on wood, it's been good. At night there still is a craving, because my wife and I always enjoyed a happy hour together. So we still have the happy hour. I'm experimenting with mocktails right now.
Oh, wow.
And they're actually pretty good. So it's kind of fun just to try something different. But it's good to recalibrate and reboot.
So for people that maybe don't know, what's a mocktail?
Good question. I served someone a mocktail the other day, and she said, "But I've already had two." No. There's no. It's mocking a cocktail. There's no alcohol in it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So she had never heard the phrase. Yeah. They're becoming more popular. There's a new kind of temperance movement, if you will, not as bad as the old one that led to prohibition.
Yeah.
But just people experimenting with different kinds of non-alcoholic drinks. And so a mocktail imitates a cocktail, but it doesn't have alcohol.
But then you can enjoy more of your drinks in the book. I guess I don't know, maybe if you take out some of the alcohol.
Well, one thing we did before I gave up drinking for Lent is we discovered that to sort of prolong the party, you can actually have mocktails as like sort of in between your other drinks. That way you're rehydrating, you're still enjoying conviviality and flavor, but you're slowing it down. You're pacing yourself.
Idea. That's a really good idea. Wow. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be alcohol. It was for me, but I have a friend who has given up everything but beer for Lent. So
wow.
No cocktails, no wine, but he will enjoy a beer. In the Middle Ages, there actually were religious orders that had a beer and water diet during the whole of Lent. And
I've heard of that.
People, and the beer was different. It's called it's Doppelbock. Bock beer was actually invented as a Lenten beer. It was extra rich in nutrients and vitamins to compensate for the Lenten fast. And the Polaner monks, from which we get Salvator beer, that beer was originally designed to be their only diet, along with water. Now, you can't use modern Salvator beer for that purpose. You really do have to kind of specially brew an extra rich, nutrient-rich beer. But there are people who have done it, and I've talked to them, and they said it was amazing. They said it's not easy. It's not what it sounds like. Like, oh, I'm going to be buzzed all day. It's going to be wonderful.
Yeah.
It really requires a lot of discipline. But they said they lost like 30 pounds. They had to like work things out with their boss. They had to work at home. They weren't going to be driving. But they weren't buzzed all day, and it wasn't an exercise in discipline.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah. Go figure.
Well, I know. Well, thank you. I'm glad you did this letter, because it kind of fits with everything that you do with this book. And yeah, that was Michael Foley, Drinking with the Saints author, and who gave the commentary like you just heard on the letter 9, day 14 of Lent. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Have a good Lent.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, definitely for me.